TACD, or the Technical Assistance Center on Disproportionality. And I probably spent about 7 of my 9.5 years on that project. We were funded by a federal grant to work in schools that were cited by New York State for disproportionately suspending or overclassifying Black and Brown kids in special education. Basically, went into schools and we helped them figure out, why is it that you are having these disproportionate outcomes in your school? What's the root cause to these issues? And so that required us to have to really push people's thinking around race, around implicit bias, and how our implicit biases manifest in the way that we interact and behave with children and the kinds of expectations we have of them. And so that led to very uncomfortable conversations.
Fear of the Free Child is a weekly podcast that centers
diverse narratives, insightful commentary,
learning with our children and deschooling ourselves, owning our multiple identities and treating children with dignity,
creating community and sharing conversation from often silenced spaces,
breathing life into liberation practices proactively and on purpose.
It's about parenting. It's about self-directed education, loving. It's about learning, liberatory practices,
defining love for ourselves and giving our love to as much of the world as it can possibly contain.
Let's find each other. Let's support each other. All of these stories are important and should be shared. Nurturing a healthy marriage, parenting, staying involved in community work, and building a business. Any of those things take so much work. And when you add them all together, you got a whole lot going on, right? This episode is about the work of leaving our careers and all its perks to build the thing we need but cannot find. Chemay worked in academia, and she was able to travel and have a great impact in the type of equity and justice-centered work in which she deeply believes. But this comes with significant sacrifice and plenty of doubt. But it's also a brilliant example of how natural learning works. You feel a pain, you have a need, your curiosity is sparked, so your research phase begins. You start researching around this thing you want to see, and broad research organically evolves into more specific research. You now go from this big idea to some very specific areas you want to influence in some way. Then you naturally share your curiosities, your urges, and the resources identify themselves. Sometimes these resources are people you've known for many years. Other times it's a brand new person or place. You pose questions on your Facebook page, resources come. You tell a sister friend who happens to know something, or someone who knows something about whatever it is that you're into. Fear, doubt, all of those things come up, but so does clarity and courage and other people who've been wondering and researching and studying the same things as you. And then other people still whose curiosities are linked to yours. This is the average process for unschoolers and other people, children and adults, who engage in self-directed education. And so many adults are unschoolers but just don't know it or don't call it that. Usually because media associate unschooling as anti-school. But the fact is it's not. It's anti-forced schooling. So for some of us, school offers a deeply effective and desirable way to dive into the thing that we're into. Such is the case with Chemay Morales James, who you'll meet today. She had a pain point that sparked research, and that research organically evolved into a particular study. And she found other women who were more than willing to pour into her vision, and others who wanted to help her and to collaborate because their vision felt connected to hers. Here's the story of how a Nuyorican woman who worked at New York University, NYU, as a social justice coach for educators, is now living a life that evolved from a great career nestled inside academia into now unschooling her 2 sons, Judah and Keanu, along with her husband, Shane. So Shane is from Trinidad, and so they're raising 2 Afro-Latinx boys. Now, unschooling, as you've heard me say since the very first episode of Fear of the Free Child, is a tool for liberation. And of course, liberation doesn't fit into a box. So for Chemay, liberation isn't just for her family. It's a path she wants paved clear for all people, particularly Black and Brown folks, to have the resources to liberate themselves too. So to do that work, Chemay is in the heat and heart of building a community-centered organization, a space called My Reflection Matters, that provides tools to support and nurture healthy racial and cultural identities of Black and Brown children and older youth. Chemay knows what many of us know, that our liberation is linked. We all need to get free. And that takes us being community-minded as well as self-involved. We gotta want what we want so much that we're willing to create it and to accept help with it and to do it in such a way that contributes to our collective liberation. That's the work Chemay and her support team are doing over at myreflectionmatters.com. So let's talk about how that went from a pain point to a powerful movement.
Chemay, thank you so much for making time to be with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. Same. So we'll be fangirling each other this whole time. That's what's up. So I want to start, of course, with why is My Reflection Matters necessary? How did it come up for you? And why do you feel like it's so relevant right now?
You know, I mean, it's always been important for me in the social justice work that I've done for a good portion of my life. But really, it hit me hard when I started having children. The story I always tell people is that my eldest son, who's 5 now, and I have a 3-year-old boy. At that time, my eldest son, Judah, he was, I don't know, maybe about close to a year old. And we went shopping at our local parent and teacher shop, which there aren't many around these days because a lot of them are now on the internet.
Tell us where you are. You're in Connecticut.
So I'm in Connecticut. Yes, cool. I'm in Connecticut. So we were shopping at the store and I'm just looking around to see what I can find. And I just remember my blood pressure was rising as I continued to look at the items in the store because I'm shaking my head. I'm thinking, my kid doesn't exist here. Like, I don't see my kid. And I couldn't even find a brown skin baby doll. Like, it was that bad. I'm like, I thought, at least can I find like a brown baby doll in this store? And so I left there really upset about that. And then, I had all this anger and these feelings. And then they came back again shortly when I was shopping for underwear. And I don't remember if I was shopping for him or I was shopping for, a nephew or something because he was a little bit older. But I do remember looking for underwear, toddler underwear. And again, that feeling rise. I'm like, I see these cute little caricatures on where they would sit on a child's bottom, but there are none that look like my child. And I felt really uncomfortable with that. And I thought, am I crazy? Like, I'm getting upset with underwear. This is really absurd. And so I had this conversation with a friend of mine, Christina, who we worked together at that time at NYU. And she's a mother of 2, well, now 3 children. And at that time, her son, who was about the same age as my son, and she's a Black mom, and she was saying, Chemay, you're not crazy. I feel the same way too. Every time I go into a store, I'm looking at the toddler underwear too. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm not the only one. Yep. Like, it's 2000 whatever. And like, my kid still doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And this is in a very surface level way, right? Because we're not even getting into deeper, more complex ways that our children don't exist. Right.
And all of it is connected. This is the thing why I'm so excited to have you on too, Chemay, because you have such a strong background in social justice and racial identity development work that you recognize this. And I feel like a lot of times we dismiss these sort of smaller, sort of surface, I'm using air quotes, things, but they're all connected, and I feel like you'll be able to help us understand that connection too.
There's, I believe it's Claude Steele, who he's written a book on stereotype threat, Whistling Vivaldi, great book. And so I've read that years ago before I had kids because it was part of the work that I was doing at NYU. And it's a great book because it's written by a researcher, but the everyday person can read it. So it's not like super heady or anything or super academic.
Yeah.
So he talks about his research around stereotype threat. And one of the things he talks about are these social environmental cues in our environment. So an example of that is what we're talking about, the lack of images of our children on clothing and books and curricula and whatever, anything that you can name pretty much.
Yep.
And those social environmental cues send us a message that there's something wrong about people that look like us or that we don't exist.
Absolutely.
So the toddler under is a social, the underwear are their environmental cues that send a message to my kids that there's a standard of beauty. There's a standard way of being, and it looks this way. And when they constantly see that with the clothing they wear, the toys that they play with, the books that they read, the shows that they watch, it's like those mosquito bites that keep, sort of like biting at you. And it seems small, not a big deal, but over time, you start to feel the pain.
Absolutely. And I really, really admire that you didn't just let it be, Chemay, because a lot of us, for various reasons, we move past it. We get upset, our blood pressure rises, as you said, and then we call our girlfriend, or call our homeboy or whatever. And then we have the moment and we move on, and we have several of those moments and we move on. But you didn't do that. You did something about it. And I really, really appreciate that. It dawned on me too that we should back up a little bit and say, what does your boy look like, or both of your boys now? Because there's Judah and there's Keanu, right? Yes. What do they look like? What do you look like? What does your man look like? Tell us something.
My man, well, he's chocolatey smooth and all that, but I won't tell that. But my husband is from Trinidad. He was born there. He came to the States about 6 years old. He came here. And then I'm Puerto Rican, but I was born in the Bronx. So I'm a Nuyorican, I guess, kind of. But my New Yorker friends would be like, Chemay, like you left here when you were 2, so you ain't really a Nuyorican. So I try not to claim that because I know that really.
But
really
for the record, technically you are.
But technically I am.
Cool. Yes.
So they have a nice blend of the two of us, So yeah, my eldest definitely has, the chocolate brown skin that his dad has. My youngest has more of a caramel complexion like me. And it's funny because when he was born, my husband's like, is he going to get darker? And the doctor's like, you married your wife. Like, have you looked at her?
That's too funny. And we come in all shades. That's the beautiful thing.
We absolutely do.
Yes. Yeah, so you could not find, and I was reading the interview, and I love how you were saying that your husband was saying, man, nothing for my son, Mumsy, very similar thing. I'm Jamaican. So we know Mumsy, but we might call it something different. But I love that you introduce that as well, because again, even with our language, that's another one of those social cues, this idea that one thing is appropriate and another thing is not. And so I feel like it's so important that we integrate more of the terms that we totally made up and the ones that are just, maybe just popular in our neighborhood or in our country or in our wherever. We need all of that. So y'all, Trini 101 Mumsy is bottom. Okay? Write that down. Mumsy is bottom.
Much better than I can.
And I love that you said that. So going back to that story, that happened. You talked to your girl about it. You're like, yo, am I tripping? She's like, no, it had a similar experience. And then what happened?
So, at that time, like I said, Judah was young. I hadn't even had Keanu yet. And I remember Christina was like, Chemay, just do it. Just, because I started having these ideas. I'm like, maybe I need to open up my own store and it's just going to be for Black and brown families who struggle, finding these things like I do. And then I'm like, okay, I ain't got money for that. So that's like a big X. And so it kind of sat for a few years. And I had Keanu, and then I was working on a different project at NYU. And my friend Kalila, who also was working with me on this project, I mentioned it to her and she's like, girl, if you don't do it, I'm going to steal that idea. So I said, okay, I'm going to work right now.
See, they know how to get us moving, right?
Oh, yeah. She really got me moving, and she hooked me up with a friend, well, actually a former student of hers, who really helped kind of get me started. And I needed someone to help hold me accountable. It's sad, it's like when people want to lose weight, they don't do it unless someone is, there, at the gym, holding them accountable. You know what you got to do at the gym, but you just won't do it unless someone's there pushing you. And
Chemay, don't get me started on the why around that, because that's where self-directed education comes in, because we're socialized to need that validation and that push from something outside of ourselves. Yeah.
We absolutely are. Yeah. And let me tell you, And I recognized like I needed that in that moment in my life because I knew I wasn't going to do it. But then I recognized when I didn't need her anymore.
Yeah,
right.
Good.
And it was like free. It was the most liberating feeling I've ever felt. And I still feel that I can do this work. And one, I don't need anyone else, like you said, to push me every day to do this because I'm motivated and I've had a taste of the freedom of doing on my own. So, and I want my kids to feel that, which is why we don't have school.
See,
I know that school won't inspire them to feel that way.
Right. And it's not about being an island, right? Like I want to make that really clear. We're not saying we don't ever need anyone. Obviously, it was really helpful for you to have someone, an accountability partner, a motivator, a back rubber, all of these different things. So we're not saying that it's about doing it independently, but it really is about being motivated, like being able to be your own motivator and to be your own leader, which is very different than saying that we don't ever need anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Community is important. Yeah. And I've learned that a lot also from your podcast when you talk a lot about unschoolers needing, especially, unschoolers, people of color that are unschooling, feeling alone and needing a support group. I need to feel like there are people out there that have the same kind of crazy questions that I have.
Right. I always say that if nothing else for just to not make me feel as crazy. For sure. Yeah. And so you tapped into the resources around you and then also the ones within you, because when you were at NYU, you've been mentioning that, but we didn't talk much about that yet. You were serving as a senior educational equity coach, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you tell us how that sort of thing lends itself to, the work that you do now? Because again, you have this brilliant background in this sort of work. So it's really like you're so beautifully designed for what you're doing and what you're offering for us now. So tell us a little bit about how that ties in.
So yeah, I worked at NYU for almost a decade. I worked for the Metropolitan Center we've changed our name and now it's been almost a year that I left, but it's we've known it as the Metro Center at NYU.
Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools.
Yes. Got it. It's a really long name.
Descriptive too, though.
It is. Yeah. It's very clear in terms of what we do. And Dr. Pedro Noguera, who is a really well-known urban sociologist, who I had the privilege of being able to work with him for most of my time there at NYU, led the center, but he also then, I think, inspired us to change it to a really long name before he left. So anyhow, at the Metro Center, there are several arms of the Metro Center. And so one of those arms that I worked for was TACD, or the Technical Assistance Center on Disproportionality. And I probably spent about 7 of my 9.5 years on that project. And what we did was we were funded by a federal grant, and that grant allowed us to work in schools that were cited by New York State for disproportionately suspending or overclassifying Black and Brown kids in special education. And also my background in teaching is in special education. So this job that I did was basically went into schools and we helped them figure out, why is it that you are having these disproportionate outcomes in your school? What's the root cause to these issues? And so that required us to have to really push people's thinking around race, around implicit bias, and how our implicit biases manifest in the way that we interact and behave with children, and the kinds of expectations we have of them. And so that led to very uncomfortable conversation.
Sure. And necessary conversations. Yeah. And I know you stayed busy, because I know a bit about New York. I've had a couple other folks on who were, dealing with essentially adjudicated youth and, connections to the school system, and very much seeing that level of disproportionate suspensions and just, punishments in general around Black and Brown kids. And it's so, so disheartening, but also very encouraging to know that there's work being done around that and conversations around that, because it doesn't just affect the children in schools, right? So when you talk about changing our own ideas around what we're thinking, and I talk a lot about participating in our own oppression, parents even, us, we don't even know, because we put so much trust in the school system that we're often torn to say, well, if you stop tripping to your own child, then this wouldn't be a problem, not realizing the things that are happening at an institutional level that are affecting these things.
Absolutely. And that's very cultural. When I think about my own family, and it wasn't that my parents didn't show up to school because, most of the time they did, especially my mother. My father sometimes, because of his past experiences with school, I think didn't always feel comfortable or feel like he can adequately communicate with teachers.
Yes.
They were there, but they didn't always ask questions. They kind of just sat and listened, nodded, and accepted that the teacher is the professional. Yep. The teacher is, is the person who's going to know the right things to do with my kids. And that was never a question that you would ever pop up in your head, that would pop up in your head.
Right.
And that becomes, unfortunately, it's a beautiful thing that, in our culture, and when I say our culture, I think of Caribbean culture because it was similar in both my husband and my family's background, that you entrusted the school. They were held in such high regard, like
Absolutely.
a lawyer or a doctor, right?
Yes.
That you don't question them. But unfortunately, and or at least I can speak to American schools, there are not always people that have the best interest in our kids.
Right, exactly. Or even understanding of our kids. And so it spills over into everything because then your kid is constantly trying to make themselves okay in an environment that inherently could not validate their existence, could not make them feel comfortable with being who they are. I mean, it's so nuanced. It really is. And especially when you're dealing with parents from another country, which was very much the case for me as well. My brother and I were born in Jamaica. And it was a similar thing there. And then when we came to the US, it was also a similar thing. And I get so frustrated, Chemay, and tell me if this is something you've experienced too, where you hear a lot, especially here in the US, you hear people blame the parents to say, well, if you would show up more in school, but then we don't realize, again, it's so nuanced, which is why what you're doing is so, so important. As you mentioned with your father, right? It's a matter of them even feeling like, one, can I communicate effectively? Two, because I don't have this type of job, am I even going to be seen as valid or intelligent enough or have enough of an influence in the space? Three, can I get off work to show up each time? There are all of these different things that we don't even address. We just say, oh, Black and brown parents are not showing up unless the kid, So these are the things you feel me, right? You've had that experience.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Those are everything that you're saying are the conversations we had to have in schools.
Yeah.
Like why don't we unpack the why instead of making assumptions and judgments on a whole group of people? And then the harder, the biggest push that people didn't like was, and why do we have these assumptions about these particular groups, but not about groups that look like us?
Right.
Because it seems as though when, parents and kids reflect ourselves, when I'm saying ourselves, I'm talking predominantly white, middle class, female, because 80% of the teaching profession are white, middle class females. Yep. There tends to be this, willingness to kind of look at, well, what are the contextual factors around a young white boy who hit the child in the classroom? Right. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe something happened at home. His parents are divorced. Someone passed away. And maybe he's, manifesting this anger, against his best friend. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think those are the questions we need to think about. But I get so frustrated when I see and I've been in schools across the country, right? Not just in Connecticut and New York, given the nature of our work. It's the same pattern I see, Akila. It's the same pattern, this unwillingness to pause and ask ourselves, before I make a quick judgment here, are there any other contextual factors that I need to consider before I make a recommendation to special ed, before I make a recommendation for this kid to be suspended?
Yep. Yep. This is not a New York thing. This is not a Georgia thing where my daughters were in school before we transitioned into self-directed education. And it really is very much an epidemic that, again, this isn't just influencing the child, and this isn't just about crazy teachers or anything like that. It affects everything, because for so many of us, particularly as immigrants or coming from immigrant parents, this idea that we another guest put it so beautifully, Lane Santa Cruz, she said that we outsource our children almost immediately to the system, and it gave and still gives me goosebumps quite literally when I hear it and when she said it, because that's what we do, because it's tied into different things, in my opinion, respectability politics, even though we don't know it as that, but also just this genuine desire for our children to thrive. So we say, okay, if you can just behave, Chemay, little Akila, little Judah, little Keanu, if you can just behave, if you could just not give this teacher any problems and work your way through this system, then you can thrive, because we feel like it's this safety net. But it really isn't, because there are all of these other things that we have to survive, but we just don't know, because the conversations aren't being had at a broad enough scale, and we don't feel empowered to give an opinion that someone's actually going to consider or unpack, as you said.
Yeah. And there's Dr. Noguera, my former boss, he used to always say that there's a lack of cultural capital, social cultural capital that a lot of our families don't have. And that when we do have that, we are able to navigate these very complex, institutionally racist systems, right? And I'm fortunate that my husband and I, to some degree, right, we have some of that. Yeah. So even if we decided to put our children in school, and, those fears of like, is my kid going to get suspended? I know that my kid, these things wouldn't happen, because I have the social capital to be able to maneuver through that system. But there are a lot of families that don't have that. Exactly. And a lot of those families are Black and brown families.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Many, many times it's Black and brown. And I would even respectfully challenge what you said, Chemay, to say that it could still absolutely happen to your kids, because because you're not sitting in the classroom. You're not sitting in the classroom, and how our children react is not in our control, or how other people view them is not within our control. We think these things all the time. We think that if we have our child in a certain type of school, or if we live in a certain neighborhood, that somehow it's not going to happen. But there's evidence everywhere to say that that is not the case.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Unfortunate that it happens to any of us, whether we have the capital or not. But that is the reality. And again, which is why the work that you're doing around identity development and this dialogue and the recognition that this is not a surface thing. It was not just about the brief on his Mumsy. It was about, so much more than that. And so this is why, as you're doing this work with My Reflection Matters, I know how people are receiving it, because I know how it felt for me to know that there was somebody out there that said, you know what, I'm not just going to make this about me and mine. I'm actually going to research and consistently, because I'm on the newsletter. So I see the resources that you provide, and I'm so, so grateful that you're doing that. So as you got to the space where you said, all right, this thing is going to take shape and I'm going to do something about it. What did you do for starters? How did you get started with My Reflection Matters?
My friend Kalila Brand, who we worked together on this other project that I did for about the last maybe 2 or 3 years at NYU, which is the Center for Strategic Solutions. And so on that project, I talked to her about this. She's like, Chemay, I think you could do this. You probably just need someone to kind of get you started. And so she did. She hooked me up with a former student of hers. We talked, and she said, listen, because I had all these grand ideas. I'm going to start an online business, and it's going to be, this online parent-teacher store. And I'm going to find all these resources. I don't know where I'm going to find them, but I'm going to find them, because I know they're out there. I know there are some out there. They're hidden gems, and they're not in mainstream market, but I'm going to find them, and I'm going to have this space where people can come and they can purchase whatever they need, whether they're a homeschooler, unschooler, teacher, whatever they do. Yeah. And so she said, okay, wait. You need to first get yourself out there and make yourself present. So then we got started with social media. So she said, take it slow, start a Facebook page, start sharing some good articles. As you find resources, share them on your page. And then you can start thinking about what's the next step, right? So that's what I did. I started a Facebook page, then started a Tumblr and Instagram. And really, business is, I'm not a business person. So, I go into this not really business minded, but really as a hungry parent who's really starving for these things for my children. Yeah. And that's what motivated me to do this. And then these technical pieces of how you market yourself and get the name out there so people could also learn about what you have out there. I started to learn as I slowly did this with good friends that have some skills and resources and connections.
Yes, and that is called self-directed education.
That's
Unschooling,
exactly
one more
what
time.
it is. Exactly
and it's
what it's
so much more effective, right? Because you're passionate about it. And again, it wasn't about having the formal education, because you can source that. You can bring, as you said, I read that you brought in Nafisa Kingston, who was helping you with these things, and your girlfriend here, or calling this person here. These resources show up when we mobilize, when we allow ourselves to step out, when something really, really inspires us. Those resources show up, and sure, there's a learning curve, definitely. But when is there not? But the tenacity is there because you're committed to it, and you can see exactly what needs to be done and why it's necessary.
And it helps, working with Nafisa and having Kalila and Natalie and Vivian. I'm thinking of all my female friends, my mother, my sisters, having these strong women around me that had these different ideas and opinions and skills. I mean, that helped guide me in the work that I did.
Yeah.
It was nice that when I called up Nafisa, who helped get me started, to hear that she herself, as she's building her business, she could share with me the bumps that she was going through as she was building her own business and her own brand. It was so nice to develop that bond and that relationship with her and feel like I'm not alone in this. This is normal. When we feel these feelings of doubt, this is normal. It will soon pass.
Yes. And you can work through it. Yes. Yes, I love that because there's this whole thing around about being fearless and all of that. And I can't tell you how much that pisses me off, because I feel like for so many of us, it makes us feel like, okay, well, clearly I'm not ready because I'm still afraid. No, you can totally do it. I do that shit all the time. I do so many things with fear all up and through. Fear is not on my shoulder. I have a fear suit, bodysuit. And I still can figure it out, as so many of us can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how it sort of started growing. And then, people were following me and were asking me questions. Can you find this? Do you know if this exists? And I would go and I'd do the research and I'd share it. And then I thought, I'm sharing all these things. I should probably publish something and share it with the world. And so then that's, again, self-directed learning, right? So then I'm like, okay, so let me put together a newsletter and I'll start sharing these things with folks. And
yes, and it's such a great newsletter. Yes, and I'll make sure that the link to that is in the show notes page. And I want to read, just because it's so good. I'm going to read the mission. So My Reflection Matters mission is to provide the tools necessary to support and nurture the development of healthy racial and cultural identities of Black and Brown children and older youth. It is my hope that through the thoughtful use of the resources shared by My Reflection Matters, this engagement will foster self-worth in youth, a love for humanity, and develop in them the ability to think critically about the injustices they and others experience, empowering them to combat internalized and institutional racism and oppression in American society and around the world. What? If all of that could fit on a t-shirt.
I should record your voice. You read it so well.
It's so good. Oh my gosh. I mean, listen, as I said to you at the beginning, I'm like, I'm tripping. Why wouldn't you have been on the podcast before? Because, particularly with the background that you have and the ages of your sons right now, I feel like it's so important that in the unpacking, as we said, of all of this work, in the ways that we participate in our own oppression, in the ways that we need that validation from our community, that we're not crazy. I just feel, Chemay, that you are the person to help us do that consistently, because it's not a one-time thing, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So when I message you again, don't act brand new.
Oh my God. It's funny. Like you said, we're fangirls, right? Cause I'm like, when I told my husband you had called me, I said, oh my God, or emailed me. I was like, Akila Richards emailed me. She wants me to be on her podcast. And he looked at me like, are you crazy? I'm like, the podcast that I listen to when I want to be alone in the bathroom, and I put on the tub and I sit there and listen to, because that's where I listen to in my nice warm tub.
Yes. All the feels.
I listen to your podcast to relax, because I never vegetate and take time out for myself. So, and you always talk about the need for us women to take time for ourselves.
To mother ourselves. Absolutely.
Why not do it with Keanu Richards, right? So.
Right. And Chemay. Don't leave your name out now. So this is so wonderful. So I feel like we have given a good sort of overview of the what and why. So now, what now? So we're listening to this and we're like, hell yeah, I have this experience all the time. What can we do to support you and to connect with what you're doing right now?
So right now, I'm actually in the process of building a website.
At the time that we recorded this, Chemay was still working on the website with the help of a few folks, but now myreflectionmatters.com is live. Yeah, I've been on the site. It is so good. I absolutely recommend that you check it out after this episode. Sign up for the newsletter and get involved however you can if any of this conversation is resonating with you.
And also, it's funny because when you had reached out to me, I was starting to think about how can My Reflection Matters also have another branch, right? Which caters to Connecticut home educators, because I'm struggling as a Connecticut home educator to find and connect with other Black and brown families that are also in the same boat. So I said, okay, when you can't find, you create, right? So
yes.
So actually, this past Sunday, I just published the My Reflection Matters in Connecticut Home Education Network group, Facebook group. So we have, I think, about 30 or 40 members right now, but it's been since Sunday. So, but it's amazing to see. I'm like, all these people live in our little state.
And you would have never connect, right? Listen, I'm so glad we're alive in a time where we can connect via social media. As much as I fight, I have this like love-loathe relationship.
It's a love with
right? But it really is such a beautiful connector. And I got to get over my issues with Facebook. Because then there's so many people that I wouldn't have connected with. And I'm learning so much. I'm very, very grateful that you're and I need to make sure I get the link so we can put that on the show notes page, which by the way is going to be akilasrichards.com/MRM as in My Reflection Matters. Nice and easy. So I'll put a lot of these links on there, including the one to this Facebook group. So we have a website. We have a Facebook group where we can connect with folks in Connecticut and nearby. And what else is on the burner? What's the big vision? I know that you said that what it is right now, those are smaller parts of the bigger vision. Yeah. Indulge us. What is the bigger vision, Chemay?
So, it's funny because, again, this goes back to when you were speaking about self-directed learning. This is the beauty in self-directed learning, that sometimes you could have this vision, and as you start to engage in your own learning process, that begins, that mural or that painting begins to take shape in a direction that maybe you hadn't even thought of.
Exactly.
And you realize, wow, this painting is more beautiful than I ever even imagined it to be. Yes. And I'm experiencing that right now. So with, thinking about, having this website, having, now this other extension of My Reflection Matters for Connecticut unschoolers, homeschoolers, world schoolers, whatever it is that you do, that but you serve Black and brown kids where we can come together. But also I've also envisioned creating my own products, because there are things out there that I still can't find.
Yes.
And so again, when you can't find, you create. Yes. So I've connected with my homegirl, Kalila Brand. I've mentioned her a few times. Her head's going to get big too. So I got you need to
shout out to Kalila.
So Kalila, and a teacher that she had worked with in New York City, Kathleen Antoine. Kathleen and Kalila started their own blog called CREED, and that stands for Culturally Responsive Educators Across the African Diaspora. And as both New York educated teachers, they've really, and Kalila has a background in Black history. And then Kathleen's background, I think, is in literacy or English. And so with their backgrounds, they really have been putting out some great blogs to folks that are hungry for history told from a decolonized perspective, right? Oh. So they share, some of the research and history that they share that I sometimes I cry and I think, why didn't anyone ever teach me this? Why didn't I know these things?
Right. Well, we know why, because, it's empowering and, the more knowledge you have in that space, right? And I need to make sure that I get that link to, can I just say that Chemay's show notes page is about to be so lit. Like there's, like, I'm so excited. What'd you say?
I said, it's all about the resources.
Yes. And that's just what you do. That's clearly what you do. Because your show notes page alone is about to be like one of your newsletters where you're just like, let me open 17 tabs so that I can look at all of this right now. This is wonderful. And you're also introducing us to other people of color who, again, are in a position to do something about the problems that we're seeing, to do something about this way that we unknowingly in some instances participate in our own oppression, and to raise free people, because this is what this is about. Judah, Keanu, yes, this is about making sure that they are not going through the same things as you mentioned in the interview you sent me, the one you did last August, where some of the same issues that your mother had, you come now years later and you're like, I'm dealing with the same thing. We're doing something to make sure that our sons and our daughters are like, I remember when my mother had this issue and here's what happened. And I'm so glad it's in the past. That's what's so exciting to me about this, because we are doing things about raising free people and simultaneously liberating ourselves. You've used that word a few times, liberating. Yes. And and that's so important too, because when we feel free, as you said it, literally, you said, I got that taste of freedom, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because when you get that taste of freedom, it's like you can't even play around. You cannot. You cannot.
Who does that?
Right. Where they do
no
that?
No one has ever done that.
Right. So I'm very grateful that you did something about that, and now you are making space for us. So this is great.
I wanted to also say, because I was mentioning about Creed, that we joined forces and we're right now in the process of writing a children's book. And girl. Talk about liberation. And my mom is actually working on the illustrations, which is really awesome to have her working on the project with me. Yeah. And so the four of us are working on a children's book on the Black Panthers, and that's all I'm going to say. Yes. And the goal is to have that out in September. So you'll be hearing about that as well.
Wonderful. So y'all know you need to get on the newsletter, which the link for that will be on the website. You definitely need to stay involved with what Chemay is doing and see how you can be supported and also provide support, because you know what this is about. People of color immersed in this way of figuring out how to raise free people and free ourselves. We need to be able to support each other too, y'all. So don't just listen to this and be like, shout out to Chemay. No, join the newsletter, share it, connect with My Reflection Matters on Facebook, share it with other folks, message her and tell her what you're not seeing. This is a community effort.
And if you have a product, and a product doesn't have to necessarily be something that someone sells. Sometimes a product could be a lesson plan. I think about educators, people who are working in public schools and believe in self-directed learning and are struggling to do that kind of work within an oppressed system.
Right.
But there are some people who don't have the luxury to be able to leave the system. There are some parents who don't have the luxury of removing their kids from the system. So I try to support those educators because they're brilliant, loving teachers that if they're going to be in a space, then yes, I need those teachers to be there for those kids. And they have great ideas and things that they do in their classrooms that, share it with us. I'd be happy to share those things. And if anything else that you create or produce, send it to me. I'd be happy to share it with our community. Send me a sample. I sample things with my kids and we'll share our opinions on those things. So
good.
Absolutely. Share.
Yes, and that is plenty. And so already we need to do another episode too, because I want to talk about this luxury that you keep mentioning, because it's so not, I tell you, because I think it's harder for us and the things that we sacrifice to remove our children from the system. Because remember, Chemay, a lot of us do it not because it's easier, but because we have very little choice, because our children are suffering inside the system. So, I say that certainly not as in anything against you, but because I know so many of us listening, and that's one of the things too, where we just need to have more conversation about it so we can unpack it and understand it. Because I know it can look outside looking in, can seem like a luxury, but in many cases, it's how we survive. And it's how we make sure our children survive.
Yeah. And it is really like I'm learning. My viewpoint, it's realizing sometimes it takes a shift of your mindset to then begin to shift how you do things.
Absolutely.
And then you realize that, what I thought was a luxury is something that anybody can do. It's a matter of really changing your viewpoint and your perspective about how you can go about doing it. You do change your lifestyle. I mean, my husband and I, our income level is very different than when I was at NYU, right?
Yes.
Because I've chosen to have more time with my kids, and I've chosen to build my reflection matters,
Right. And people might look at that and say, oh, must be nice. And it's like, no, you don't even know what it takes. Same here. Same here. People say that all the time. They assume because you saw me on TV or whatever that you assume that we're balling out of control. Yeah. And it's like, I'm the first person to say, no, this is a sacrifice that we make. We both of us, Chris and I both decided that we can either live really well. The careers we were in were paid very well, and we didn't have significant savings, unfortunately, or we can figure out how to raise liberated children. And we chose that route. And it's so much harder financially, but it keeps our family intact emotionally. We say all the time, if he was still in his career and I was in mine, if I had finished and gone to law school and done all of that, and he was in marketing and all of that, we probably still wouldn't have even been married. Because of the pressure that, the more you make, the more you're owned by this corporation, the less you see your children. Yeah. So you're so right. And I'm very glad that you didn't take offense to that, because I certainly didn't mean any. But it's very important that we have these dialogues ongoing so that we understand each other. We can be like, oh, word, that's what that is. Same way that I had these ideas around like homeschooling, and I'm learning so much from just connecting with folks that what we call homeschooling in some instances, it's not, homeschooling looks like a zillion different things. And who knew? I didn't. Yeah, so this is good. Do you have anything else that you want to share with us? I'm so excited about Creed. I'm so excited about the book that you're writing. Oh my gosh. We need more of those.
And there'll be more to come. We have other book ideas, but that's all I'm going to say right now.
Okay. Got it. You heard it here first, people.
Yes, here first. That's right.
Thank you for sharing with us so much. I really appreciate
having me.
You're very welcome. And as I said, I definitely, we will be in touch. Yes, I want to have you back on, and I want to make sure that we can continue to support what you're doing outside of just sharing it online, but also really figuring out how to engage and grow this thing, because we know the minute you sign up for the newsletter, you get that first one, y'all, you'll see why we really need to support this. And this can't just be something that Chemay and a few other people are working on. We need to take this thing together because it's so necessary.
Thank you. Yes, it is necessary.
Very welcome. Once again, that show notes page is going to be akilasrichards.com/MRM, as in My Reflection Matters. All the details will be there.
Was that not so very good? I've already put Chemay on alert that I'll be inviting her back because we have so much more to talk about. There's this special kinship here that I'm really hoping to continue to cultivate and support with My Reflection Matters. So I appreciate y'all for being part of that by listening in. And speaking of appreciation, I got a shout out to this week's new patrons. We got 2 new people to celebrate, Nicole and Genia. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, Genia, Genia. So I don't know if it's Genia or Genia. I don't know. But I'm thanking you, and I'm thanking Nicole for becoming patrons of Fair of the Free Child podcast. Because with your support, I can keep this going. So y'all, if you enjoy the show, please do what Nicole and Genia and so many other wonderful people so far have done, which is to head over to patreon.com/Akila. That's P like Paul, A, T like Tom, REON like Nancy, patreon.com/AKILAH. It's also going to be on the show notes page, which of course for this episode is akilasrichards.com/MRM, as in My Reflection Matters. You can get to the Patreon page there as well and invest a little bit or a whole lot in this movement towards increasing access and information about self-directed education for people of color and the communities in support of inclusive, liberated learning spaces. Peace, y'all.
Tweet your feedback using the hashtag POC&SDE, as in people of color, in self-directed education.
Thanks for listening to Fair of the Free Child podcast. Like the show? Then show your love or give your feedback at akilasrichards.com.